It's time to get real with Lady Ray. Real talk, real conversation. Real people, real answers. Real talk, real conversation. So let's get real with Lady Ray.
I typed in the word gender-based violence, and the first thing that came up was violence against women and children. Am I led to believe that violence is only perpetrated against women and children, and men are never victims but always perpetrators? Tonight I have with me Mr. Hungani Ndlovu. Many of you may know him as the heartthrob Romeo from Scandal. But I have him on the show in his capacity as a director, an active board member of Matrix Men, as well as a survivor. Good evening, Mr. Hungani Ndlovu, and welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me.
Before we get into the topic,
Yes.
tell us a little bit about Mr. Hungani Ndlovu.
Wow. So I am a young man who is very much about entertaining people. So I'm an actor, I'm a dancer, I dabble in some music. I recently got myself into DJing. So I really like entertaining people. And I happen to also have a passion for educating people. So I started an artist development studio where we teach acting and dancing. And then obviously there's like some form of, I don't know, something to do with always being around people. Wow. So then myself and my wife started a foundation where we go to like churches, youth groups, we go to prisons, schools, and we give talks there about life things that we've learned thus far, particularly for young people, just because like a lot of the time we look at social media and there's not a lot of great influences, especially because people like get sidetracked at who to follow. So we like to kind of infiltrate that space. And then of course, Matrix Men is something that's very close to my heart based on my upbringing through primary school, high school, and then just like general.
I'm going to pause you there before you take us to where we don't want to be. So, on tonight's show, I've decided to speak about violence, sexual and gender-based violence against men and boys. I looked at all the platforms, and social media platforms, TV, radio, is inundated with conversation about violence against women and girls. However, when it comes to men and boys, the contrary exists. In your opinion, why do you think society on a global level chooses this narrative?
I mean, I think this goes back like hundreds and thousands of years, where the male figure was, or is rather, deemed the strong one, the one that is the head, and with that came a lot of like responsibility, if I can say in inverted commas, where you're not necessarily given the platform to be weak. And I say weak like this because what that even means is we can have a whole other conversation about that. So like men were put in this position where you always had to portray this image of strength and like the ability to take care of your family or whoever might need taking care of. And I think that's where this whole idea of a man or a boy cannot be a victim because society tells us that we're strong. So if I'm strong and something that happens to me makes me not feel strong, then I probably won't tell anyone because then I'll be seen to not be strong. Yet my portrayal out there is that I am strong. You look at like bodybuilders and rugby players, all these, like these are like macho men, you know, and that's what a lot of young boys aspire to become, this macho man, you know. You go to these very prestige private schools, the rugby is very big there. A lot of the grade 11s matrics are either doing some form of doping in order to be able to play in first team, and that's just because they need to be macho and strong and all of these things. Like there's just so many things that society has created that make a boy and a man or a guy feel like they can't be vulnerable, they can't show emotion, because that breeds weakness. So it's a long time coming thing, which hopefully conversations like these will help to break that barrier so that people can understand that we all have emotions and feelings.
I noticed in your answer you mentioned society.
Yeah.
Would it be safe to say that we could actually pin the blame on society for the fact that so many men and boys have to live in silent torture?
I could say yes, and obviously that's just my opinion. And I say yes because it's like an all-round thing. It's not just men who think like this. Majority of the world thinks like this, male or female, you know. So when you look at culture and tradition, particularly in like your, if I can say, black culture or black tradition, the man is like, it's his word or nothing else, you know, things like that. So like if you find yourself in a position like that where you're the man in the house, yet you were just victimized and violated, and you must come home to your wife and your children and still be the man, and you can't tell your wife that, listen, this just happened to me, I don't know how to deal with it, this is what I'm feeling, because you fear that she might look down upon you. Like, well, then, of course, it's a societal thing, you know. But if it was just like a men's way of thinking, then maybe we could deal with that separately. Or if it was just a woman's way of thinking, or just, I don't know, a children's way of thinking. Or
it's a global phenomenon of some sort. The funny thing is, you said the man is the head.
Yeah.
But you know how messed up the brain, the head is? If we look at it naturally, when we think of the head, there's so much that goes into it. So if we want to portray the man as the head, I would think one needs to take into consideration the fact that the head is probably the most messed up
and
organ
the most
of the
complex.
body. Exactly. But talking about society and the role that society plays, what do you think can be done? And maybe here you can also just tell us a little bit about what Matrix Men is doing to change the narrative that currently exists.
Lady Ray. So I think what needs to happen is a lot more conversation like this. So thank you for creating a platform like this one. Matrix Men, we are firstly trying to raise awareness at the fact that males can and are victims of abuse as well. And trying to break the stigma that there's like a hierarchy of some sort, where else it's just like, can we just all look at each other from the same scope, in the sense that we're all human, and we can all either be a perpetrator or a victim. And that's what we're trying to do, and also being able to like normalize the conversation, because it's such a taboo topic that it doesn't happen around the dinner table. When there's kids, if you have a daughter, you have a father who's like, yo, I'm gonna make sure that no one messes with my girl, but no one ever says I'm gonna make sure no one messes with my son, you know, but they both at risk.
Exactly.
You know, so you look at the stats in our country. There was a research that was done a couple of years ago called 13,000 Reasons for Equity. And in this study, they found that 44% of all boys in South Africa, by the time that they're 18 years old, have suffered sexual abuse. Now, if 44% of boys, by the time they're 18, have suffered sexual abuse, that's basically 44% of our men in the country. And then you look at gender-based violence that's portrayed by the media, and it's very much on what women and girls experience. Then there's another study that was done by UCT, the name escapes me, but that study showed that boys are 4 times more likely to perpetrate a rape when it's done to them. So when you look at the study that says 44% of boys, and then you look at what's happening in our society, then you get to understand what's going on. But
Yes.
people don't want to address the real reason. They just want to address the symptom, and for as
root
long
cause
as you're
analysis.
exactly. So for as long as we're treating the symptoms, we'll never get to the root cause, and that's essentially what we're trying to do. And I think having more conversation will allow it to become something that's like not so uncomfortable.
Yes.
Not to say that we're saying that it's okay that it's happening, but having the conversation about it the same way we're so okay to talk about, oh my gosh, I was mugged and they stole my phone. That's such a normal thing because
Yes,
it's
absolutely.
South Africa, it's a dangerous country. But same should go for a conversation like this. It shouldn't need to be like, okay, now we're talking about this and we know it's touch and go, so let's be careful. We should talk about it on the dinner table. Parents should be very open about this with their kids. In high schools, in churches, we should be talking about this pretty much everywhere because it's a very real thing.
Your passion is intense when I hear you speak about sexual and gender-based violence against men and boys. So I'm led to believe that you didn't just join Matrix Men because it was one of the organizations that appealed to you because it sounded nice.
Yeah.
What's the passion and the drive behind that?
Okay, so it's a bit of a long story, but we'll make it short for TV. So basically, growing up, I was a very shy kid, and it took a very long time for me to break out of that, and I guess I'm doing a lot better now. But I was severely bullied in primary school, which just affected me tremendously going into high school. And then got into high school, I went to a boarding school. If you know anything about a boarding school, then you know they've got traditions and initiation and a whole bunch of things that are completely unnecessary. So I experienced a whole other level of bullying to a point where there was things that were very sexual. Like it almost felt like things that would happen in prison, not in the sense that it was penetrative, if I could use that word, but it was very sexually driven in the sense of like things like dry humping, but that was like a matric boy doing that to like a grade 8.
Wow.
So then I started to experience things like that. And then time went on and we had a school psychologist, and I gravitated towards the psychologist because I was like, listen, I need someone to talk to.
Yes.
And went to the psychologist, spoke to her, and thought that, you know, doctor-patient confidentiality would be something that exists. And by the time we were done with our conversation, I felt a lot better. And literally not even like 3 hours later, all the boys that I had spoken about in my session with her had been called in to our housemaster's office to be reprimanded, I guess. And of course, my name was mentioned. So then when I got back into the hostel, the boarding house, everyone knew that I had snitched. And if you know anything about boarding school, just like prison, snitches, it's not a good thing. To be a snitch, you are basically like bullseye in terms of like another target. So it just amplified the things that were happening to me. And then by the time I left school, I was completely like a different kind of person that I was when I went into high school, because after that incident, took on the notion that, okay, it's fine, I understand what's happening here, there's a hierarchy and there's a system, so I just need to fall into the system in order to survive. So then I got myself into the system, and by the time I was in matric, I had a little baseball bat that was about this big that used to fit into my backpack. And literally, if you were a grade 8 or a grade 9 and you would not greet me by saying, "Hi, sir," I would whack you with my baseball bat. That's like how I got into the system. Nothing that I'm proud of, and that's just like one incident that I'm mentioning. There are many other incidents. And eventually I left high school, obviously, and went to tertiary, and I left the country thinking that maybe like a fresh start would be great, somewhere new, nobody knows me, and I got into a relationship. And based on not having dealt with a lot of what had happened to me, the relationship became toxic. We had an abusive relationship. My girlfriend at the time, we got very physical and would hit each other, swear at each other. It was just a very toxic relationship. And it lasted for about a year and a half. And we, for some reason, never chose to leave. We tried doing counseling, we tried to go to church, we got baptized together, like we did the whole shebang.
Whole 9 yards.
But it never amounted to anything. And what saved us was the fact that both our permits to live in the United States expired, so we had to go back to our home countries. Mine was South Africa, and hers was Slovenia. So then I came back home, and when I got back home, I realized that I have a lot of things that I need to deal with from primary school that I haven't dealt with. And then I went to Google, just like anybody else would, and I looked for a place that particularly deals with men. And I legit couldn't find a place. And then that got me like, whoa, what the hell is going on? And like I kept searching it. And like, Google has like, when you go to the bottom of the page,
Next
then
page.
you see like all the yeah. So then I think I got to like page 3. That's where I found Matrix Men. All the other foundations were foundations that solely deal with women and girls or women and children. So I gave Matrix Men a call, and Martin answered, and we met up for lunch. A very, very nice gentleman, and told him why I needed to chat to him. And from there, we started to converse, and he kind of became my peer support. And through that, I found a sense of, if I could say, healing, growth from my experiences. Not to say that I was ever quiet about my experiences. I was always vocal about them, not necessarily to the people closest to me, like my family, my parents or my sister.
I was going to ask.
But I always spoke to other people about the things that were happening. But
Can I interject there? When you said you spoke to other people, was it as a cry for help, or was it just to vent, or was it to help them? What was your reason for speaking?
I would say more like just to vent, because I struggled with how to express myself.
Okay.
Just like many guys, our level and ability of expressing how we feel is very limited. We're not as capable to express or describe how we're feeling in the same way as a woman is. And obviously this is a generalization, because not all women can do that, or not all guys are like this, but I happen to be one of those guys. So it was more of just like, this is what's happening to me. I don't know what to do about it, especially like in boarding school. My parents were in Polokwane and I was in Joburg.
Yes.
So I'm not trying to tell my mom that I'm being beaten up because I'm not making someone's bed in the morning. So what's that going to do to her? It's going to make her stressed. Then she's going to want to come to Joburg. Then they're going to tell the headmaster. Then that's just going to make my life worse. And then, because I don't, so it was that thing. So I would tell like my friends in school, and then because they were experiencing the same thing, we might not see what's happening to each other all the time, but because they're experiencing the same thing, then they would also just be like, yeah, dude, it also happened to me. This guy hit me and wah, 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 wah. So that's how it was so easy to fall into the system, because we were all just going through the same thing. There was no one who was like, okay, you know what, we need to call this to an end. because we're all just experiencing the same thing. So that's kind of where I found myself. And when I met with Martin, it was just a great opportunity to kind of see that like there's a lot more room for growth in this like area, because there's more harm that's happening that we're not speaking about on a larger scale. And that's where, because of being an actor and being on Scandal, I thought maybe let me actually join the organization to like just be like a face and say, hey guys, if you need a place, there's Matrix Men. So that's how I joined.
Okay.
But after that, I literally was like, no, I'm not just going to be a face. I want to be active, and I want to make decisions, and I want to help make this thing successful. And now we are where we are.
Wow, that's an amazing story. I just want to backtrack a little bit into your story. When you were in boarding school and you spoke about it to the psychologist and let's just say the school headmaster, did they not view it as abuse? Or do you get the impression that it was more so like, just, it happens, it's normal?
So with the psychologist, she listened.
Yes.
She took notes. She asked how I felt and asked who had done the things that I was talking about. And then basically reassured me that things will be okay. I didn't get any sense of anything like this is something that is okay that it's happening, or it's the norm in an environment like this. I felt very safe, actually. So when I found out that she had released her notes, I was very surprised.
Okay.
Because I felt very safe to share the names, etc., because in my mind I thought
it was a safe environment.
Yeah, and also it's going to help me like find some form of release or whatever the case might be. I never got to see the conversation that the housemaster had with any of the other boys, so I don't know what happened there. But even when I had like my interview with the headmaster before joining the school, the one thing I asked in the interview, because he had a whole bunch of questions, my parents had some questions, and then he asked if I had a question, and I said, yeah, I just have one question. Is there bullying in your school? And he reassured me that there was no bullying. So when I did experience bullying, I knew that I was lied to. So it wasn't a thing of like, I could go back to him or anything like that, because I got to realize, okay, this is the situation that I'm in. I just wasn't so, if I could say, strong enough to tell my parents in order for me to go to another school, because I'd experienced it in multiple other schools. You know, I went to 2 primary schools. Both primary schools, I experienced the same thing. So for me, it was just like, well, regardless of where I go, I'm going to experience this, so I might as well stick it out until the end.
And find a coping mechanism. So, do you think that a lot of people do not categorize bullying as abuse?
I think they categorize it as like a rite of passage. Like, you're going to experience it regardless, so just find a way to deal with it. It's in the corporate world, it's getting you ready for corporate. Like, there's all those kind of terminologies or sayings, if I could say like that. And I think like it's a very wrong way of looking at it, because things affect us as people in different ways. There's some people who, when they get bullied, it helps them to gain strength and build some form of character, and then they deal with the bully and it never happens again. There's some people who retreat even further back and they continuously get bullied. So like, you can't treat all apples the same, you know, because they don't all fall from the same tree. And so yeah, I wouldn't want to say that, yeah, it's not, no.
Bullying is abuse.
It is. It's point blank.
Okay. So we've covered in terms of what you've spoken about with regards to bullying as more man-on-man abuse, we'd label it that way. With regards to, and I know some people will laugh when I say this, woman-on-man abuse. which does happen. You agree?
Yeah, in fact, it's in the study that I was telling you about, the 44%. I stand to be corrected, but if I remember correctly, 41% of the 44% are perpetrated by women.
So, do you think the reason that women continue to do what they do is because they are exonerated by hiding behind the phrase, the woman is the weaker vessel?
So in my opinion, I would say that it's not necessarily because of like that phrase, but because when we look at what the media portrays, the media doesn't portray men being victims, whether by males or by females.
Yeah.
And when it is by a female, it's either a teacher to a boy, and the kind of comments you get with something like that, if you read it in a newspaper or in a magazine, would be something like, oh, that boy got lucky. Oh, he's a champ. Or he took one for the team, because it's like he got with an older woman. But what they don't realize is the effects that has on the boy.
Yes.
So I think it's like the way in which, again, society views like the standards. It's like there's double standards to this thing, you know. The whole thing of like, how can a guy be raped by a woman? It's possible, and it happens. But because people think that a woman is weaker than a man, so how would she be able to
Yeah.
force him, etc., etc. At some point in our country, there were 3 women who were going around at gunpoint and raping guys.
Yeah.
So it's just the
It's
the
not an
way-
unimaginable
no,
possibility.
It's not, but it's the lens in which you look from. You know.
Yes. As women, what can we do to empower our men, to protect them, and to help them to be viewed as more than just providers who need to be cowboys who don't cry?
Oof, Lady Ray. Yeesh, that is a big question. I think as a woman, the best thing that you can do, and this is solely my opinion, is to make sure that whoever is around your space understands that you provide a safe space for them.
Yeah.
And that you are never at a place where you are going to judge them, so that they may feel comfortable enough to come to you. The biggest thing that we find that men fear is to be judged for the things that have happened. So if I can feel comfortable enough to come to you, whether you're my sister, you're my cousin, you're my mother, you're my aunt, you're my grandmother, if I can feel safe enough to come to you and say, Lady Ray, I had this thing, I don't know how to feel about it, maybe I'm 12 years old and I'm saying this happened, is it okay, was it supposed to happen, was it not supposed to happen, based on the fact that I know when I come to you, you will respond back to me from a place of love, from a place of wanting to help me, and it won't be judgmental. I think if we can start to have more of that, it will be a lot better. The other side of the aspect is like having more guys speaking, because a lot of the time guys think that they're the only ones who have experienced the things that have happened to them. So if I don't hear other guys talking, I probably won't speak myself. So it's like everyone has to step up. It's not just like women need to do this or guys need to do this. Holistically, we all need to have a hand in how this will change, because a safe space can be provided, but if I don't feel safe enough to speak, then it's pointless.
Yes.
You know, or if the guy speaks and there is no safe space, then that could do more harm than good. And that's why sometimes you find that it's very difficult for psychologists, therapists, etc., to deal with male victims, because a lot of the time they're actually not even trained to deal with male victims.
Yes.
And if I come and sit in your room and I tell you I was raped at the age of 6 by my mother, and you
Flinch. You're
Done.
gonna shut down.
It's done.
Yeah.
You know, and that's a lot of the guys who come to us, that's what they've experienced. So for 40, 30 years, they've kept quiet because that one time when they went to someone, that person flinched or they blinked twice, and they've never spoken since then. And
Yeah.
now they marriage, their life has been dealing with this thing for, we have so many grown-ups. It's, at Matrix Men, it's so scary.
Wow.
And it would be great to help boys when they're still young so that their life can be a lot better. You know, you have a 42-year-old. We had a guy that was, I think he was 62, who was speaking for the first time. And I mean, it's a victory. We're grateful for that,
Yes.
and we're happy for him. But can you imagine had he spoken when he was still young?
The torture that he's had to go through all these years.
You know?
Wow.
So, yeah.
Hungani, if there is somebody watching this right now and they would like to move from victim status to survivor status, what do you have to say to them?
I would say it's okay, and that you're not alone. There are many people who have experienced the same thing that you've experienced, and one thing that I would like to encourage you with is to join a place like Matrix Men. It doesn't have to be Matrix Men, but unfortunately in our country we're the only people doing what we're doing. So I would encourage you to join Matrix Men because we run a peer support group. So you get to be around people who will tell their stories, and you'll get to realize that we all have something similar in terms of experience and what has happened to us, and we can find a way to beat it. So it's not the end of the world. And again, you're not the only one. And it's possible to heal, to forgive, and to move forward. And the best thing that you need to do is move forward.
Hungani, thank you so, so much for the privilege of your time. It's been a pleasure talking to you. And hopefully this won't be the last time we speak about sexual and gender-based violence against men and boys. If you enjoyed the show, please do remember to subscribe, leave your likes and comments, and to stay up to date with what's happening on this channel, click the notifications icon. I know that you know someone who needs to hear this conversation, so do share the link. Let's get everyone having real conversations, asking real questions, and dealing with the real answers. The South African College of Applied Psychology states, the acknowledgement of gender-based violence against boys and men is not opposition to that of girls and women, nor should it detract from the seriousness and magnitude of gender-based violence against girls and women. But in order to adequately address gender-based violence as an overall crisis, the cause and consequence of gender-based violence against both genders needs to be continuously addressed. Staying silent perpetuates the crisis. Good night. Thank you for joining me, and make sure to join me again next week as we have real conversations, ask real questions, and deal with the real answers. Coming up on the next episode of Let's Get Real with Lady Ray, we'll be talking Image is Everything. I'll see you next week.
Let's get real, Lady Ray.